when we think about financial sustainability, we often think about board commitments, we think about endowments, sponsorships, major gifts, all of those things. In this particular case, LA 84 benefited from this endowment that we're speaking of. And I'll just reflect a couple of numbers. Initially, $93 million was committed out of the surplus funds from the 1984 games. 31 years later, more than $225 million has been granted by the foundation to regional nonprofits. So you've substantially grown that amount that was initially given. With that money, over 3 million boys and girls and 1,200 youth organizations throughout Southern California have benefited. That's a tremendous track record, and I think a tremendous legacy. How would you say or what insights can you provide to us about how that endowment was managed over time, how it was grown over time to make sure that the initial investment continued for all of these decades?
Because of the nature of the investment, we were automatically a private foundation, because if we were to become a public charity, we would have to raise at least 30% of that $93 million every year. That was not going to happen, for sure. So we acted like a private foundation from day two, not day one, day two. And originally all of the investments were in bonds, and that went along just fine until about I think it was 1990, and we had a return of 13%. And I said, that's not going to happen again. I don't know if there are any investment folks in here. That was an enormous return from just bonds. So I begged the board to diversify. I was not president the first 2 years. There was someone else, but I've been president since 1987. That's the number of years. So I was responsible for asking the board to diversify. And I'm proud to say that we also, when we were looking to have an index fund, we were the ones who started one with Wells Fargo. That was South Africa Free, because the funds had come from the Olympic movement, and at that time South Africa was still banned from the Olympic movement because of the apartheid practices of the government, which was a crime against humanity. So, and by the way, that investment fund did very well because it was all mid-caps. There were no large caps, because it was mainly large caps that were invested in South Africa. So that was a jamming fund for us. And then came the year, and we made it up to 200 million by the year 2000. Each year we had to spend more than 5%. As a private foundation, you have to spend at least 5% of your vested assets, even if your investments that year make zero. Fortunately, we were doing well, and we made up to 208 million by the year 2000. And then it all came slowly but surely crashing down because we had too many equities. So we revised our investment policy and started having private partnerships and having private equity, which has really made the difference for us. Although we got jammed up again in 2008. Fortunately, kind of saw it coming 2009, and we had enough cash to sustain us so that we didn't have to sell into a down market, and we were able to continue to give at the 5% rate, even though we were below even for a couple, 3 years. And now we're back up to about 160 million, having spent more than 5% each year. We usually spend about almost closer to 6%.
So smart investments has been a meaningful part of that management and that growth. I noticed that there's also affiliations with major corporations like Nike, Samsung, and Universal. For your type of organization as a granting body that provides funding to other smaller organizations, what does the relationship look like between you and those corporate partners? What do they expect in exchange for the support that they give you?
Yeah, well, it's curious. Samsung happened because I became friends. Be careful who your friends are. Friends with a gentleman who was in charge of Samsung America. I met him in Singapore, of all places. He looked kind of lost. Samsung was a big sponsor of the IOC, and so I just dragged him to a rowing event to help him understand the importance of that sport. And we became friends, and I told him that the foundation wanted to have a larger endowment so it could do more. And we began talking about what we did, and it turned out that we learned a lot. We learned that we were just a regional foundation, and typically major sponsors want a national organization to support. So try not to be regional if you can avoid it. And they also needed to have a base in the area, if you're regional, where their people can be benefited, because the days of corporations not helping something that helps their staff are gone. So it's another thing to think about, to see if there's a corporation that has a substantial population of staff in your area, and they're more likely to be able to help you. So they helped us with a couple of things. Nike's been very interesting. They first turned up with a truckload of shoes at one of our programs and said, here, they're yours, and if you can unload the truck, they're fine. Took a day or two to do that. But over the years, we've been doing projects with them, things that we want to do and things that they want to do, to learn about. We help them get to the community in ways that they wouldn't be able to otherwise, and we help them learn. The other thing that we do as a foundation, which is a little bit unusual, is we undertake research, and we've done some important research for the area of sports. For instance, most recently we did research on concussions in football. And as a result of that, we learned that part of the problem with youth football is it's ridiculous to have kids less than 8-year-olds playing, less than 8 playing tackle, and probably less than 14. But we learned that it was often the referees who were refereeing the game at high school level and refereeing too many games on a day. And so we did two things. We won't make a grant to a league that has kids less than 8 years old playing tackle. And we also are working to create more referees. We're working with the Southern SMAF, Southern California Municipal Athletic, something or other SMAF, to help create a different approach to getting more referees. So we can do things like that, which is really important. And it helps us affect society in an important way.
When we think about corporate support, we often think about cause marketing and giving them brand impressions in return and some level of advertising. To me, it's interesting to hear that it seems that some of these corporations are also willing to fund research on an issue like concussions.
Yeah, we did a program with ESPN a few years ago to find out how kids were getting sports. And much to my dismay, and I think this was 12 years ago, it was primarily through handhelds at that time, 12 years ago, which is probably why so many kids are nearsighted anyway. So try not to let your kids do this too much. And that was frightening for me, because that's not really sports. That's not moving. To me, sports is the mind directing the body through the dimensions of time and space, and all sports require that. And it's something that we do as humans, no other species does. And we enjoy it, we're excited by it, we talk about it. People get into that zone of excellence. And if you can do that in sport, we need to learn how we can do that in our everyday lives. And there's so much to learn about sport that we ignore, because it's for kids, or it's fun, or it's entertainment. But it's something that we as humans do, and we need to learn more about it.
Yeah. One other question on financial sustainability before we turn over to cultural sustainability within the organization itself. With your board of directors, what typically do you ask of them? Often we see a minimum get or give commitment, which most foundations ask of their board. Have you done something similar, or do you ask for something else?
I have tried and failed. I give, but the board it's a private foundation. And I guess when they became board members, they were told it's a private foundation. And typically for private foundations, you don't have to give because they have an endowment. It's a good idea to give anyway, to increase the endowment. But this board has chosen not to, which is fine. I mean, they've all agreed to do that. But it would be good. It makes it easier to get other people to come along with you, but we've been able to be successful to a certain extent anyway. But that's an important difference between a public charity and a private foundation. But we're not the big boys like Ford or those. Of course, I think some of them actually pay their board members. We give them a really nice lunch 3 times a year.
I'm going to have to try that one. That hasn't worked for me yet, so I'm going to try that.